In today's episode, we sit down with feminist author and activist Soraya Chemaly for a conversation that feels both urgent and really deeply grounding. Soraya's new book, All We Want Is Everything, traces how male supremacy shows up everywhere: our politics, our homes, our faith spaces, our workplaces, and especially in the lives of our children.
So, together, we talk about the rising backlash against women and queer people, the way boys are being pulled into misogynistic online spaces, and really why so many young men are drifting towards anti democratic movements without even realizing they're being manipulated. Soraya offers a powerful reframe for what we're seeing culturally, and most importantly, along with real everyday actions that families can take to disrupt those old gender scripts on sports fields, around dinner tables, and in the tiny moments we rarely name but constantly repeat.
This conversation is so meaningful. We use a lot of big words in there that might feel heavy, but this really is a challenging, hopeful, beautifully honest conversation filled with the kind of clarity that can actually shift how we move through the world. So let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast. What do you mean by that? We are your co-hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha. Okay, would you please introduce yourself?
I'm Soraya Chemaly. I'm delighted to be here talking to you again. I am a feminist author and activist, and my latest book, All We Want Is Everything, is about male supremacy in our lives, intimate lives, political lives, professional lives, religious lives, and why we should be using that language to understand the problems we have to solve.
Ooh, it's so spicy and good. What inspired you to write this book, and why now in particular?
So presidential elections seem to really get under my skin because I wrote Rage Becomes Her after 2016's election. But this time, before the last election, presidential election last year, it really seemed to me that no matter who won, there would be a terrible backlash, and it would be intersectional. But in any demographic you look at, it would impact women, particularly, women with disabilities, queer women, Indigenous women, really the hardest because of the way our society is structured. And so even if Harris had won, there would have been backlash. And now that we know Trump has won, there's backlash. But I believe very deeply in my heart that we're also seeing something else happen simultaneously, which is that we've moved from the aggrieved entitlement that men have been struggling with for a century. Every progress that women have made, that minorities have made, there's been backlash, and that has always involved in aggrieved entitlement. But I think the internet has enabled the shift from feelings of aggrieved entitlement to organized misogyny and other forms of hatred, so the manosphere, to, in our current government, militant masculinity as infrastructure, where women's rights, for example, to abortion, or trans people's rights to gender affirming care, aren't just being taken away, they're literally being transferred to other people, majority of whom are men, to make those decisions. Those rights didn't just evaporate, they were shifted. So now state legislatures, doctors, lawyers, aggrieved ex-spouses, rapists have the ability to claim power over people who are pregnant, And so I just thought it was important in this moment to name the dynamic, which is male supremacy. And it's global. In all the authoritarian macho fascist movements, the first thing that happens is the re-entrenchment of binary gender norms, because you need that structure to fuel and stabilize all the other forms of oppression.
I like that because I remember there was a part in your book where you said, whichever way we're looking at it, whether it's trad wives or like, it is just that there is this binary. And is it to do with a simplification? We just need a simpler way to understand all of this.
You mean the binary?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the binary is there, this particular binary is largely in its current form. It came straight out of imperialism, colonialism, Western philosophy. Right. And so if you think of something like Descartes and you think of dualism, and you think then of racial capitalism, you understand how saying there are men and women, white people and non-white people, culture and nature, um, how that then turns into hierarchy, right? And so in those categories, indigenous people were non-persons. They were like nature. They could be worked to death, or indigenous and black people could be worked to get death like a thing, like a resource. They could be exploited like the land. And we see still today not just the legacy, but the efflorescence of those systems, because they are part of every aspect of our lives. First thing anybody wants to know when they're pregnant, is it a boy or girl? And we understand that gender is much more complex. Sex and gender are complex issues, and that there's so much more to us than these two rigid ideals. And also, in so many cultures around the world, you have not two sexes and genders, but three or four, in some places even five. And those cultures were punished and erased through colonialism, and now they're kind of resurfacing. But we can't separate those legacies. It's not just, I think, the socialization or the simplification, it's the power
Yeah.
that they bring.
Part of your book echoed something I read on the power code, that the masculine approach to power is power over. And granted, this is sort of a simplification of it, but the more
Yes.
feminine interpretation of power would be power to do something or power with. And it was this different understanding of
Mhm.
domination versus influence in order to do something for the
Yes.
collective.
But even in that framework, people will think that's men versus women. But
Mm,
it's different to say it's masculinized and feminized. There are lots of women who use that what you're calling a masculine model of power. We're seeing it every day, right? To enforce dominance over others. And so I really still take issue. And I know I could be, this is Pyrrhic, right? But I do take issue with saying that's men's power. There are lots of men who understand that dominance is very bad, that control is just going to hurt people and themselves. And there are lots of women who couldn't care less and are, out on the front lines of
yeah.
fascist marches. And so I kind of want to resist the use of language, not because we mean it to be gender essentialist, but because it will be transformed into gender essentialism in conversation or people's minds. We're all perfectly capable of all the things.
Mhm.
And I think that's the point.
I appreciate that. And it reminds me also of some of the things that we don't know. I took a class as an undergrad called, I think it was called sex. I mean, it was
Mm.
literally a class
Yes.
on the history of sex. And that was when I learned, like, we didn't know how pregnancy worked until the early 1900s. People used to be born with what they deemed micropenises, have them
Mm.
cut off, and then be raised as a girl. Like, these were not like
No,
ancient torture practices. These were happening like in the
absolutely.
1900s.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to the presentation of gender and sex and like complexity that we
Yes.
are really trying to simplify also by not
Yeah.
knowing all the,
By
the
not,
beauty
yeah,
and
yeah, I
hidden.
think one of the interesting things about what you just said is that because of the mass introduction of photography into culture, or really in the 20th century, right? And into medicine, what happened is there was a standardization of what it looked like to have certain genitals that didn't exist before. If you were born, in southern Italy and there were no pictures of what it meant that you could standardize babies against, it was just that's how you were. And your parents decided how you would be dressed or whatever the cultural response was. But photography created norms in this way of what it looked like and what it meant. And then once those were established, doctors would look at a baby and look at a picture and be like, well, clip, clip, we don't want the. And so even the notion of intersex people existing was visually erased in that cataloging. And now we're just trying to undo that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we have loved having you on this show
I
twice
love
already,
talking
right?
to
Like,
you.
we've deconstructed rage with you, which I'll
Yes.
be, referencing in the forthcoming book that I'm
Yeah.
co-writing. We've discussed resilience and the resilience
Resilience.
myth. And now we're talking about gender. And so, you are a deep thinker and a great articulator of the trends that you're seeing. If you could see one major cultural shift in the next decade, Given all of these pieces that kind of fit together, what shift would you want to see?
What I want to see,
Hmm.
the shift I would want to see is young men understanding that the anti-feminism they are largely accepting and in many cases promulgating, it is a manipulation. It's a political manipulation. And I think that would kind of probably be horrifying to young men who would like to think of themselves as clear thinkers and rational people and knowing themselves or knowing the world around them. But if you've been doing this long enough and you start off in like 2005 with the dawn of social media, and then you go to 2015, which was right after a phenomenon called Gamergate, and then you look at how social networks where young men just wanted to aggregate for games, for example, or for other forms of sociality, were then taken up with deliberation by right wing forces and turned into a force against democracy. If you've seen all of that, you might understand better why the anti feminism is politically expeditious for fascist forces. And everyone's worried about a boy crisis. The biggest boy crisis that I see is young men's rejection of progressive democratic norms. I don't understand how we can just sit by and not talk about that. And the relationship, of course, of loneliness to that, you know. So I would want to see a greater awareness and understanding among young men, which frankly, a lot of them are going to have to just come to on their own because a lot of adults are doubling down on exactly the thing that's going to re-entrench the values and norms that are causing so much of this harm.
What do you mean by they're doubling down on
I
what?
mean, I think a lot of, these boy crises, they're cyclical. They've been cyclical over the 20th century, and they happen with regularity. And in their basic precepts, they don't change so much. And usually the solution is to find a way to allow boys, for example, to feel pride in themselves and their masculinity. But very often, and I'm hoping that's not the case this time, but very often that pride comes from traditional gender norms, like norms that haven't changed much. And so we continue to socialize boys the way their fathers and grandfathers, we socialize them to a past, whereas we've been socializing girls to a future for decades. Girls grow up learning in large part that they have to make the world a world in which they have equality, but boys grow up learning that they've lost a world in which they had power. Those are not compatible. And so we see that with Gen Z, And so I think that if boys could understand that they too are part of progressive movements in a way that allows them to accept women as equals, and that means also equal competitors, for example, in school, then that's what I would want to see. Am I rambling? Did that make sense?
No, that totally made
No.
sense.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about this because, I think one of the things that we really focus on our show is how do we take like the theoretical, right? Make it into something really practical, right? Where people can be like, oh,
Yes.
this is what we need to do. And I know you live in that zone too. So this
Yes.
is why I'm so excited to talk to you about this because in particular, you talk a lot about the small things that
Mm,
we can do to fight against male supremacy.
mm-hmm.
And so I want to tell a little story here because when I also think about male supremacy and I think about raising boys, I'm raising Black and Asian boys who, kind of have a different view on the past because they weren't necessarily in power then.
Yes.
But I also have a partner who is really, really devoted to making sure that what men and boys have been socialized to be in the past and how we continue to socialize them now is not going to be repeated in the
Mm-hmm.
future. So, and you talk about sports parents too and sports. So I'm kind of meshing it all together here because I have kids who play a lot of sports.
Yes,
And
I
so,
do too.
yeah, so lots of time on fields. And in particular, this summer, we were at this national baseball tournament in upstate New York. And it is like the epitome baseball dreams, and in particular, baseball parent dreams. And a lot of times that means baseball dad dreams.
Mm,
And so they finish the tournament. It's a group of 12-year-old boys, basically, and all of their families. And we're at this final lunch for, to celebrate the team. And they did really well. And everyone was really happy, great mood. We're out on this lake, like in upstate New York. Anyway, so there's a buffet. Right. And, everyone's kind of setting up the tables. And as is traditional in this team setting, right? The moms are like, we got this. We're gonna
Mm-hmm.
like set up the buffet. We're gonna get the stuff. We're gonna like put all the stuff out there. And then there's buffet stations. And a couple of the moms are like, okay, well, we'll just grab the serving utensils and we'll stand behind the stations. And this
Right.
is like standard
Every
practice
time. Every time. This
every
happened
time, right?
every time.
Every time. So my partner looks at this and he's like, oh no. So he gets up and he's like, hand me your utensils, this woman.
Mm.
And she's basically like, not having it. She's like,
No.
no, go sit down. Like, we'll serve you. And he's like, I'm not going to let these boys watch
See
a group
this,
of
right?
women serve,
Yes.
right? So he gets in there, the only dad to do this, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, and is like, serving the boys. And he's
Yeah.
like, this is what it means, right?
It
This is
is
what
what
it
it
means
means.
to be like a man. And this is what, we can't default to. And like by we, he was meaning like everyone, like we cannot in this room default to
Yeah.
what we were socialized with and what
Right.
we continue to perpetuate. So, like, I think of that whenever I think about
That's
examples
a
of like,
really good
how do we do
example.
this, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it's such a visual example. It deals with, boys who are at a very formative age, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
probably getting a lot of different messages in their lives, right? So, for the sake of those listening, right? Can we talk about some other specific actions, right, that you think hold this line?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Sarah, do you have examples that do you want me to jump in?
I mean, I could tell a story too. I remember in our home, I mean, forever, I was the person who cooked. And during the pandemic, my husband's job shifted. He was home a lot more. I was taking on more responsibilities. And I
Mhm.
kind of said, look, I'm going to be honest. I feel, and I had to admit to myself, I feel like maybe I'm unfeminine and I'm undoing this role of what you expect a wife to be, but I hate cooking.
Yeah.
And you
Not for
love
me, and you love
cooking.
it.
Yeah. And I said, you love it. Can we shift things up? And
Mhm.
even then, post pandemic, like he settled into a new job and everything else. I was like, he has kept the cooking. And our
Yeah.
kids know that in our home, dad cooks. Dad cooks better
Yeah.
than mom. Dad loves it. Like this is the thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I speak to other families about it, they're like, you're so lucky you have it. Like as if I'm so spoiled. But
Yes.
some of it was very intentionally done,
Hmm.
obviously because I hate
Absolutely.
cooking, but also because I want my kids to see that they can expect if they choose to marry a man, that
Right.
they can expect that partner to step up in ways that aren't like traditional, the
I mean,
roles. So
the things you're describing, the things that I write about, they really are embedded in the minutia of daily life. There are these videos, a constant stream of videos of men who don't know their children's best friends' names, or they don't know their children's allergies, and we're supposed to think it's all funny. And
yeah,
it's
who's
so
the
not funny.
pediatricians
Who's the
are.
pediatrician? It's just not funny. And so I think I also had so many experience like that on sports fields, in classrooms, and I was, as I say in the book, making friends and influencing people, always pushing back. Like it does not make you friends to be that way. So, I think if I were to do it again, what I would say is do it in like encourage other people to join you to do it. I was often in situations where I felt like just an outlier with my spouse. The two of us were just like sore thumbs, and that's hard. You don't want to be that person at all times. And so what I found in retrospect was that many people were thinking what I was thinking, thinking what my spouse was thinking, but they weren't doing it, and the doing is what matters. So the one that really sticks with me, I'm a secular person, but I grew up Catholic and I grew up going to Catholic schools my entire life. But when I was 11 or 12, I wanted to be a priest. And the response to my wanting to be a priest was really shocking to me because the first response was laughter. Like my dad just laughed. It never occurred to him that a girl would think about being a priest. And then the second response from my mother was, well, you better go talk to our priest. She at least entertained the idea. The priest, unfortunately, he was a constantly drunk man. I knew he was drunk all the time. And he really couldn't understand. He couldn't explain reasonably. And the conversation essentially came down to, you're telling me I can't be a priest because I don't have a penis. And that was just ridiculous. I have brothers. Like this struck me as so wrong. So I spent the next 10 years and into college just reading and thinking, well, what is the reason? Surely I can't be right. It can't be sexism and misogyny. And it was sexism and misogyny. But I say that because I said to my parents at 11 or 12, this is not for me, this faith. And they said, you don't have to go, you don't have to take communion, but you do have to go with us because we're not leaving you home alone. But they were great. They were like, that's your personal choice, but we are still going to church. But I write in the book, and I think I write this in every book, every time you take a child into a place of faith where women are barred from speaking, where they cannot minister to people, where they have no structural authority, you are teaching them that fact. And they don't keep that fact in pews. They take that fact into the world and they take it to school and work and the sidelines. And it so powerfully permeates our culture. We have the most religious of all our peer nations. The United States is the most religious. And we can see right now through the sort of Christo-fascism that we're living through what that is yielding. So for me, not taking my children into faith-based spaces that are patriarchal was very important as a parent, and telling them why.
I also wonder about, and thank you for sharing that. When you were just saying that, it reminded me of your talk about male flight from certain
Mm.
jobs. And,
And democracy.
right. Well, and teachers used to be male and
Yes.
now they're predominantly female. Like when you look at these jobs
Yeah,
that feel so gendered, I mean, and I know when you think about that, you can just think of them off the top of your head.
absolutely. They're all women-dominated jobs. That's what we call them.
Right. But then I remember feeling like I did something right when I think my kids were 6 or 7 and they went to a doctor and the doctor, I didn't realize this, but it was a man. And they were like, men can
Yeah,
be doctors. Like I
men
had
can be
taken them
doctors.
to female dentists, female
Female
pediatricians,
doctors,
female
yes.
everything. And I like that felt like just exposing my children to what women can do
Mm-hmm.
felt like a little bit of a rebellion, I guess, that I
Yes, a
didn't even realize
subversion.
that they picked up on until they said it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I did do that. Like, yes,
Yeah.
you're right. And so what is the flip side of that for boys? Or does that same sort of little rebellion count, across the board for what we can do?
I mean, first, if we could touch on male flight for a minute. Right now, with the boy crisis narratives, again, there's this press to say schools are feminized. They're not built for boys. And yet we refuse to acknowledge that girls are succeeding despite the institutional obstacles that remain within school spaces, right? They're not succeeding because schools are so friendly towards them. They're succeeding because they have to succeed. And they have to succeed in one definite way, which is to try and close the wage gap. For a woman to make what her brother makes, if he has a high school degree, she needs a college degree. If he has a college degree, she needs a master's degree. So there is a pure incentive in being educated if you're a woman that boys don't have. Secondly, though, these spaces are dominated by women teachers, but administration, school boards, those are dominated by men. The people in the teaching profession who make the most money are men. And we don't talk about that. And then thirdly, as you said, men used to be the majority of teachers, but they left the sector when women started to reach parity and salaries because of discrimination dropped. And not only did they flee from this sector, but they go into other sectors which are then fortressed against women. So if you think about tech or you think about economics, very hostile spaces for women, those are fortressed. They're male flight destinations. And so now that we're worried about boys fleeing education because it's feminized, we can't have that conversation without talking about male flight and the teachers that left first and the stigma that boys associate with being in feminized spaces. So that's why I really won't talk about the boy crisis until we have those conversations. And I think if we want I mean, I personally think children benefit from having all kinds of role models in school. We should have rich, dynamic range of people teaching and coaching, and yet we can't because of everything we're talking about.
I read an interesting study as part of this other book, and it's reflected in what's called the Opportunity Atlas. An economist, Raj Shetty, took all the
Mm-hmm.
data, like anonymized data from the IRS, and they looked at where kids were most likely to be able to increase their income.
Oh, wow.
And you can map it across the United States based on things like, I think it was like what percentage of homes had two parent households, how many returned their censuses, and like who had college education. And
Mm-hmm.
it was this idea of like, it's actually about who your children are exposed to that they can be the most
Yes.
financially successful. And so, are we allowing that same exposure for all of our children, men
Mm-hmm.
and women, boys and
Well,
girls
we know we're
alike?
not.
Right.
Like we
Right.
we already know we're not. But
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about this is that in the same way we're seeing male flight from the social sciences, male flight from education, I think we just saw male flight from democracy because the Democrats in particular, fueled by young progressive women, very vocal, talking about issues associated with women, care, infrastructure, and abortion, were seen as not for men. And young men turned rightward. And that's true all over the world that that's happening, and so I think of that as male flight from democracy as a feminized space. Why is the boy crisis not that turn? Why are we rationalizing young men not embracing progressive democratic ideals?
I was talking to someone about YouTube recently and how like during there I think they were watching like a sports video or something and YouTube served them an ad that was a religious ad basically and was like and this is like on an anonymized, not logged into YouTube. YouTube's just like, here, tell you about this faith-based thing and like question your faith. And they were like, so this is the world we are in. And so now you're getting all of these. And I think about, we have really strict controls around what our boys can watch and do
Mm-hmm.
for obvious reasons, including a lot of this. But I think about everyone in their age range who's exposed to YouTube and
All the
getting
time, all
served
day.
all of these things constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that constant refrain, when it's sort of bolstered by this, thinking about what they've lost and, the
Yes,
challenge that's being presented is like a nonstop onslaught.
it is. It's a fire hose. And, I was just talking to someone about this Gen Z and probably Gen Alpha. Gen Z is the first generation in American history where more men are religious than women. And they're not just seeking out spirituality, like from a wide range of places. They are going to conservative patriarchal institutions. That's where they're seeking community. That's where they're looking for traditional wives in a model of subservience. That's where they're looking for validation in a particular mold of manhood. And that should trouble everybody, you know? And, on the one hand, I do, in fact, want a bowl of popcorn where I can watch 500 years from now. But on the other hand, it's really scary.
It's wild to think how many people aren't either aware of or are willing to take action in a time that is so critically pivotal to the direction of our future. And I think everyone thinks, oh, it's both a big deal, everything that our generations are going through, but hey, we've been through change before.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only hope that people will sort of bring to more conscious awareness the things that we're talking about. Like even asking kids, what ads are you getting served on YouTube? Hey, my kids have Spotify. Are you hearing the ICE ads that are up there? Like, what are we taking the time to point out to our children to try to sort of remove the subconscious element of what they're kind of believing in and sort of bringing it to light? You can talk about so many different things, but like, what's a question that you wish people asked you more often right now?
Oh, wow. What a good question that is. I think, honestly, it's really funny. I think a question I got this question the other day and I liked this question. It was, why do you think young people should be mentoring up? Why do because I really truly believe that for the reasons you just said, a lot of adults don't understand what's happening, don't understand the media environment children are in. They have a set of beliefs, again, about resilience, for example, or about emotional expression. And it makes them incapable, I think, of responding in the moment to what children might be needing. And children, on the other hand, have been socialized in a socio-technical accelerated environment. They get so much information. They get more information in a day than a lot of their parents got in a decade. And they are also hyper connected. They get exposure to a broad diversity of life. And so they have an understanding of the world that's not just different, but the way they learn about the world is different. And I think a lot of adults could benefit from listening to them rather than telling them something that is frankly irrelevant, And so that's the question I like. Why should younger people be mentoring up?
Oh, that is a good one. I think about this because I was driving my kids to school on Monday, and this week is Transgender Awareness Week at the school.
Mm.
And so it's pouring rain, by the way, and it's 7:45 in the morning, and we pull into the loop where it's the drop-off loop, and I see kids with signs and the head of the middle school with her flag and signs saying honk to support our community and honk to support transgender awareness. And so we're honking and the boys are just like, my boys are like, that this is the most natural thing. Like they have
Mm-hmm.
friends that they know at school who are transgender who are being persecuted right now. There's my oldest will be taking an international trip in the spring, and there are questions around passports
Yeah.
for kids, right? And they just know that this is natural. And, I think about how simple it is for them, right, in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, and how much joy I felt in that moment as well, in the midst of everything that is so tough and so
Mm-hmm.
difficult, to have those moments and to just be reminded, like, A, that our kids know so much
They
and
do.
could be really and are really great teachers to the adults in their lives if the adults will
Mm-hmm.
let them, right? And B, that there are these moments of joy, right? And true human connection in the midst of everything else, right? But my question to you really is, like, how do you find the joy? Like, what practices do you have to sustain yourself right now in
I
the
mean, I
midst of
think, first of
everything?
all, I think we all know that having friends, a community, having mutual care in your life, I like to think of it as hang time. Like I didn't grow up in the United States, and one of the big differences between the Bahamas and the United States has always been to me that you can hang with people for like 18 hours straight in the Bahamas. You go from like 9 a.m. until 3 a.m. the next day, and you've done nothing except hang out and trash talk each other with love. And I don't think I've ever done that here that way. And so finding ways to bring people together for no purpose at all other than to be together. And that's good for children. It's good for old people. It's good for middle-aged people. It's good for everybody. And so that's definitely one. The second is I'm super driven by creativity. I have a desire to make things, whether it's words or paintings, or it just helps me process complex ideas and feelings. And so I always say that a lot of people don't think they're creative, and I just don't buy it. Everyone has a way of being creative, but it's also just this peaceful thing, again, that you can do alone, which is also important, time alone, but that you can do together. And it's definitely something that can happen intergenerationally. I really also struggle with the tendency, I think, in our culture to segregate generations for no reason I can fathom, except for like real estate sales. Like, I don't get it. Why would you do that? And so, yeah, I just think probably I find joy in knowing that there are other people working towards the same goals and who have an ethos of kindness. You have to take kindness away from children. This is what's so shocking. Most like children are kind. Little children are kind people. And yet by the time they're like 10 or 12, they can be such epic shits. Sorry.
Yes. Middle school is the worst for this
you know,
too. No, you're absolutely right.
that's not their fault. They're just trying to reinforce rules that they're learning from adults. This is the thing about bullying. It's not like transgressive, it's just traditional.
But some of it, it's like ties into what you were saying because, when you just said this idea of creativity and it doesn't have to be for anybody, it's one thing if you're like, look, I'm putting words to a page,
No.
I got to sell it, it's got to be an outcome. It's being in the moment. And if you're just practicing that, you're not judging whether this is good or bad or whatever. You're
No.
just doing it for the purpose of it. And that practice of being non-judgmental is so good
Yes,
because then you're going to
it
practice
is.
being less judgmental for other people. And my
And
husband,
yourself,
well, yes, especially, yeah, because it
especially
starts
like
there.
all the perfectionism that these children are grappling with,
Yep.
just making mistakes. You can't make anything like that without making mistakes.
100%. And I'm all for finding your creativity. My husband will openly and does openly say he cannot even make an acceptable stick figure if you give him a
My
piece of
husband
paper
says
and a
this too.
pencil. Yeah. But the kitchen is his zone.
Yes.
He does a dash of this, a dash of that,
Yeah.
flavors, smells. Like he makes wonderful meals and he
And it's so
owns that.
creative.
Yes, and he's like an engineer and like that kind of brain, but even he finds his zone. So
Yeah.
what can be your zone of creativity to practice what we're talking about, this non-judgment, this sharing of space? Could you
Yes.
go this weekend and look up a fun activity that's an art project and sit down with your child and just do something
Just
silly
do
together?
something.
Yeah.
And again, I think this has a lot to do with masculinity because a lot of men, boys and men, they associate art, creativity, design, beauty. They think of them as feminine things. Like my father he was the sort of very typical Catholic, patriarchal, Arab, Haitian man. Like every single one of those categories reinforced this idea, right? And he, however, was incredibly creative in gardening. He loved gardening so much. And if you had said to him, you're an artist, he would have balked because he was also homophobic. And he thought those two things went together, and yet I don't think that's so far from what many men internalize that they can't be real men if they like flowers or if they like to glue paper to sticks or whatever it is, the silliness of life. We kind of take silliness away from men as boys and they don't get it back.
And yet, if you look around, I think you mentioned in your book too, how many men in a man's book club are just reading titles by
Well,
men.
that's so enraging.
It is the point of this, though, would be to say, do you listen to Adam Levine in Maroon
Mm.
5? Do you listen to the male artists who are making music? Have you seen the classics that are at the art museum? Like there are throughout history many examples of men engaging in creativity that we honor. And so what is wrong with the kid singing in the kids choir, the boy singing in the choir? That's not feminine. It's art. It's not
Mm,
a gendered thing. And we would do better if we challenged ourselves to remove
I
that from
agree.
our associations. So,
I think
Yeah.
about recently, my husband and older son went to a soccer game up in the
Excuse me.
city, and they ended up going to Haight Ashbury and
Mm.
walking around. And they came home with books because they went to an independent bookstore, which they love. And they were like, "This one's for you." And it was a collection, an anthology by Zadie Smith, her newest one. And they were like,
Oh,
"We knew you'd love this, and we want to read it too." So
that's so
I think
great.
it's those moments though,
Yes,
that it's the little things, right? That was
it
an
is. It's all the
unplanned
little
trip and
things.
it was a wander through a bookstore and it was books and they went to a record store because both of them are really steeped in music and
Hmm.
creation of music. So, but it's just the tiny little things at times too that continue to reinforce.
and doesn't that tie very much into the idea of needing time and space in order to allow these experiences to happen, which is the opposite of capitalistic, go, 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 exploitative, like
Fast, fast,
production?
fast,
Like,
fast,
yeah,
fast, fast.
give ourselves time. Like, let this be, if it's not just for your soul, let it be a rebellion against these structures and a stand saying, I'm going to carve this time out because I'm standing against this structure of everything going quickly in order for it to be valued and exploited.
Hmm.
So,
And we didn't even talk about this yet, but that ties directly to me to these ideals of masculinity that are resurging, which is the providing and the protecting. Because those ideals built on other people's vulnerability, right? To provide and protect, you have to have a person who needs to be provided for, which doesn't work if you're a woman who wants to earn her own money, maybe make more money, right? Maybe not be home with kids. Like those two things are incompatible. Same thing with protecting. You actually can't do a whole lot of protecting if it's not tied to money these days. And so both of those ideals are just so calibrated to capitalist productivity that we have to find new ideals, that give people a sense of purpose that isn't performative or that doesn't have to have money at the end of it.
Or you pointed out in that section, which I really think was very significant because I've heard this for ages. The man air quote like wants to procreate, provide, and protect, and
Yes,
but you made it a point that women in the house by making meals are
all the
providing
time.
for can we find counter examples to that where it's not just it's not just these two ways of making a job and money and therefore
Yeah,
providing, women do that all the time too, and
they're
can
doing
we
it all the
lean into
time.
that?
I mean, that really got me when I think I did write about this. I was talking to a high school, and we were talking about gender disinformation and bullying in high school, but also the way women politicians are treated the same way. And, I think it's hard going if you're a young man and you're like, why are men being such epic assholes? Right? Like literally you have to wonder, why is this, why? And it's hard, right? And this, he said, well, don't you think that I, as a young man, needs to protect like my girlfriend? And I said, sure, but do you understand she's protecting you all the time too? It has nothing to do with you being a young man. Like you're a young man, which means she's probably aware a lot of the times in social situations that there might be masculine friction and that she can de-escalate that. She's probably de-escalating without you even knowing it. And same thing at home with maybe your sister or your aunts, or, that's a form of protection. And as you said, the fact that women are protecting families from diseases and from food toxicity, and there are all these things we just don't think about. Like if women stopped doing that, people would die. They'd eat poisoned food. They'd get sick more often. They wouldn't get their vaccines. So we teach kids how to wash their hands, and that's important, and it protects them from all the things. Although I do say you were maybe asking about statistics at one point. We were talking the idea that men don't wash their hands, which came out in COVID, which is one of the reasons why they suffered higher rates of disease and death, will never leave my brain. Never. It will never. It just lives rent free in my brain.
It just makes you want to go.
Yes, and that's because they feel that they have to be strong and that they can't be penetrated.
Ooh,
Nobody can see my face.
choice of
I'm sticking out my
words.
tongue.
Ooh, interesting. I
That
want to go
fact,
back to
that fact is never going away.
so gross. That is not protecting anybody in your family if you don't wash your hands.
Just the opposite. You
Yeah,
can
but
own the gun, but if you don't wash your hands, it doesn't
uh-huh,
matter.
uh-huh. I think we all, going back to your idea of community, maybe that's just the job of all of us as community members is to provide and protect for one another. And
I
that's
mean,
just
that's
a
what we
role of a
do.
grown up. That's not a gendered thing. It is just we all ought to take responsibility because the more we also see that, the more we're responsible, not just for the people living in our four walls, if we have such a shelter, but like our entire growing community, we can protect and provide for everyone. And that's what we do for each other as humans.
That's right. And honestly, all men want to do when they protect and provide, but the word doesn't apply to them, they just care for the people they love.
Mhm.
And yet we keep that word care so sequestered to women, the same way we don't think of women as providers and protectors. It's just kind of ridiculous. It's so tiresome at this point.
I like it.
So,
Let's just be better humans, folks.
yeah. And honestly, I do believe that words really matter because they shape people's ideas. So, one thing people I really think can do is think about how they gender emotion, gender work, gender money, gender care. It happens all the time, and it's just because we have patriarchal language. Same way we have white supremacist language.
I like it. Well, hey, folks, all we want is everything. All right.
We
So
do. We do
join
want
us in this
everything.
mission and go buy a copy of her book.
Thank you. It was so delightful to talk to you both. Come to Washington.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.